Okay, welcome to 1 or 200 election season. We're your friendly neighborhood politics media New Zealand podcast. We're taking aim this year at some of the big issues that are going to be discussed coming up to this year's election in Aotearoa, especially bigger issues that maybe you won't be seen talked about in mainstream media as much. Today we're going to be talking to Richard Manning about education, philosophy, the trajectory of travel, all these fun things. But first of all, we also have joining me, Philip, as host. We have Pmax. How are you, Pmax?
Good, good. Just back from another day at the chalk face, dusted up and ready to record.
Wow, you make it sound so glamorous, delightful. And we also finally, excitingly, have Richard Manning on the cast. How are you, sir?
Good. Thank you for inviting me.
Good, good. Obviously it's fun times in education at the moment, as PMAX has been regaling us over the last year at least with kind of increasing frustration. So it's nice to get an LA on to back him up when he, yeah, travails us with these stories. But I thought I'd start off just asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're coming at this from, and your history in
Okay.
education in Aotearoa, and anything else that kind of takes your fancy.
Okay. Kia ora koutou. Yeah, I'm Richard Manning. In terms of my position, I guess growing up in Cannons Creek, I lived there for 23 years, Cannons Creek, Porirua East. So I went through, I guess what they in the olden days called Decile 1 schooling. So my experience as a Pākehā New Zealander is probably just different from a lot of others because where I grew up, I would be very much in the small minority. So I grew up in a very working class community. My mum was a cleaner. Dad worked on the ships. He was a seaman. Come from a big family of seafarers and wharfies. My dad died at sea when I was 23. So yeah, I grew up in a very strong trade union family and household. My grandfather, Charlie Manning, was blacklisted in 1951 because he was a militant in the Waterside Workers Union in Wellington. So I went through school. I didn't like school. I don't know if school liked me too much either, and that shows in my school reports. But yeah, I always loved history. I was always fascinated by the stories I'd learn at home, and sometimes growing up in a very multi-ethnic extended family too, I'd hear stories that differed to what we were sometimes taught in a textbook at school. So that kind of piqued my interest in particularly in Māori histories. I have an older brother who I didn't meet till I was much older. His name's Tony. Tony lives in Otaki. He's a fisherman, customary fisherman, and a descendant of Te Rangi Topiora, one of the few women that signed Te Tiriti Te Waitangi. And she signed that in Otaki. So I also have two whare toa relatives, Tūhaurangi, Kahungunu, um, Lebanese relatives up in Kaitaia, they know who they are. So that's that for me. That's working class New Zealand, multi-ethnic. Me growing up in Porirua, as I said, grounded in place was being grounded in place was really important. So I've long struggled with this idea that we were always learning someone else's history somewhere else. And even when we learn New Zealand history, particularly about Māori, I never really felt we were learning much about our local stories. So for me, yeah, my passion is about people's stories. And my big concern is that the Scottish people would appreciate is how you're represented by the colonizer isn't how you might see it yourself. So yes, a bottom-up history, workers' histories, her stories are not the same as his story, let alone their stories. So that's been my approach. It's history from the bottom,
Mm.
challenging that is top down, if that makes sense. And that's because of where I grew up. I've rambled on.
Yeah, no, no, no. Thank you very much for sharing that background with us. I think that's how we first met. You were giving that was part of your keynote during the New Zealand History Teachers Conference of what would it be 2024?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Gosh, that long ago already. Yeah,
Yeah. Or even, oh yeah, no, 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 definitely
yeah,
2024. Or no, 2023 maybe. Oh, far out.
yep.
Anyway, that's
We're getting
history.
old.
These history teachers, eh? Terrible with dates. So obviously you've seen a lot of change over that period of time. Where are we
Oh yeah.
at? Tell us. I mean, tell the non-teachers in the audience where we're, how bad are things? is Pmax right to be coming back from the chalk face every day, crying into our DMs and telling us it's
Yeah,
the educational world?
it's actually really scary. It's a real concern. If you want to take inspiration from people like Nigel Farage and their allies in academia, then you'll be happy. But if you're like me and are horrified by the Nigel Farages of the world, then yeah, there's actually a lot to be quite concerned about. We're going back to a curriculum that looks like something out of the 1970s, 80s, very Eurocentric, very much right wing nation building narratives, and yeah, it's I guess it's a triumph for the so-called Western canon, which means that this notion that the world's split in half between the East and the West, which is this binary idea that there's only East and West. Well, tell me, where does the East and the West begin, and who defines what is Western knowledge for who? So yeah, there's a real class bias around this curriculum. It's very much top down. It's going back to the olden days where it's about famous men and wealthy men at that, and no critique, you know, the hero-like figures, if you will. So I'll give you a classic example. This government believes that it's more important for New Zealand children to know about the Battle of Thermopylae back in the ancient times of the Greeks versus the Persians than it is to know about the Battle of Hingakaka in the Waikato, which is the largest battle ever fought on New Zealand soil. And now, most New Zealanders won't know about Hingakaka, but I tell you what, I doubt many will know about Thermopylae. But at least with, if you're like Pmax, you can take your school kids to the site where it happened, and it's in the area where Pmax teaches. So I can't take my 7-year-olds on a plane and fly them to Thermopylae. And to joke about it, seriously, I used to play football with a lot of Greek boys in Wellington, and even they're bemused by this. There are other things in Greek history we could be learning, I've heard.
Well, apparently, hoplite formations are also on the list of prescribed content.
Oh, is that what the Greek national team used in the World Cup qualifiers?
Hey, very good.
Oh.
Didn't get them far.
Oh. You did mention in there nation building history,
Yeah.
and you would know a bit more about this than I have. I've definitely dropped the term. Would you mind giving a short explainer of like what the issues with that are? Because some people might hear that and think nation building history. I like it when a nation's built.
Yeah, I guess that the problem with this quote nation building history is who defines what is the nation and who was
Mm.
in and who was out. So I'll give you some basic examples. My mum is a Dutch immigrant. And I remember her saying to me as a kid that, Eric Verdonk once upon a time was a famous New Zealand rower at the Olympics. And when he was doing well, the headlines read, Eric Verdonk, Kiwi, through to the next round. Kiwi rower makes the next round. Then he only got a bronze medal in the final, and it was the Dutch rower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've heard Moana Jackson say similar things about Kelly Evenden when he got through to the final at Wimbledon.
Mm.
He was a great New Zealand hero till he lost the final and threw his racket in the ground in frustration when he lost to Chris Lewis. Next morning, the headline was Māori tennis player loses temper.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and that's an example of who defines what is good, what is not, who defines who we are for us. Who decides what events, what people of significance, etc., are in the curriculum, are out of the curriculum. As a kid growing up in Porirua, I used to be told all the time I was, because I played what they called soccer, it's football. um, it's quite good that the World Cup's on at the moment.
Topical.
It's an example because what I'm trying to get at, once upon a time, growing up in New Zealand as a young person and you played soccer, like me, or football, you were three things. You were automatically a homosexual and a foreigner and a sook,
Yeah.
a wussy. So yeah, the whole definition of your masculinity and what it is to be a New Zealander is decided by who.
Mm.
And I grew up during the Springbok tour and all the protests surrounding that. I joined in those protests as a as a teenager. So, and again, it was who defines for me what it is to be a Kiwi.
Mm,
Is this what it means to send rugby teams to another country devoid of people within our country because of their skin color? So
mm,
those are very basic descriptions of what a nation building history is. It's sort of like New Zealand is an exceptional country because we've gone from we had a treaty, we started good, and then it went to shit. All the bad stuff happened, but hey, we invented the tribunal, and now everything's on the up again, and
mm.
it's all positive, and the
Yeah.
land of rainbows and unicorns and
Yeah,
warm
kind
fuzzies.
of reminiscent of a lot of black civil rights education
Yep,
where
yep,
there was a black civil rights movement and now there's no racism in America anymore.
yep. Absolutely no racism.
Ignore the current events.
Yeah. And in New Zealand, there's no such thing as class.
Mm,
That there's no class analysis. If you use the word class, you're instantly a Marxist.
mm, yeah.
It's like, but we know there's poverty in this country.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And we know the top, tiny amount of people own more than the bottom 50%.
but where's that in the curriculum?
Exactly. So that's what I was
Mm,
going to ask. How do these kind of more macro or bigger, like philosophical priorities factor into on the ground kind of teaching realities? Like, presumably, this is kind of an emphasis, right? That some governments, this
Yeah,
one clearly
yeah,
want to
yeah.
kind of impose. How does that work,
Well,
in a realistic kind of way?
what it does is subtly emphasizes we are all one. We're all
mm,
equal. It's the New Zealand First mantra, the Hobson's Pledge mantra. We should be grateful to colonization almost. That there's no critique of colonization. It's almost that it was beneficial largely. And I would so it's creating a story. And we've got to remember that his story is his story. And whoever the minister of any government is listening to for advice and framing a curriculum, they get to define our story. But it's not my story. It's not my story of growing up in Porirua. And it's certainly not the story of my brother's iwi, Ngāti Raukawa. It's certainly not the
mm.
story of my auntie's iwi, Tūwhare Toa, etc., etc. Their stories are overridden for this triumphal narrative of Pākehā settler exceptionalism that we're exceptional, we're better than other countries, we are this and we are that, and these values are taught, and it's quite subtle, but it's very much embedded in textbooks, and you can see in various studies how that story of New Zealand exceptionalism has developed over time through textbooks, and now I dare I say it through websites.
It's almost the typically New Zealand, I guess, soft culture version of saying the Pledge of Allegiance, right? At the beginning of
Yeah,
school in America. Like, in that sense, in America, that it's a lot more hard coded. The fact that you are told essentially like repeat the following phrase, Bart Simpson on the blackboard, write a
yeah,
thousand times, like my country is exceptional, all this. Whereas in New
yeah,
Zealand, that sounds like you're saying kind of ingrained through a learned process through these curriculums that are imposed. Is
yeah,
that
yeah.
fair?
And it's sort of like I'll give you an example. In social studies, when I was teaching, and even in more recent times, and who knows, it might still be happening in primary or lower secondary schools, with inquiry-based learning, young people would look at heroes. They would, and the New Zealand heroes. So, I would ask students that I've taught here at the university, trainee teachers, or who are New Zealand heroes, and you could imagine. I mean, you tell me who are New Zealand heroes that you would imagine our children would learn about. That they often appear on dollar notes, right?
Mm.
Um, like Edmund
Your
Hillary,
Rutherfords
Hillary.
and
Kate Shepherd,
Yeah.
and we'd go on and on and on. But generally, they're Pākehā, they're male, they're
mm.
athletes. They're seldom Māori, seldom Pacific or anyone else in the society. And they've always been part of the nation building project, working for it rather than against it.
And I guess looking at this curriculum development, and linking to, I don't know if we've mentioned the document we shared at the start, which was related to, was it testimony to the Waitangi Tribunal?
Oh yeah, the what? Yeah, yeah. The claim that's we're still waiting for the second phase of that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but in reference to that, there's like this recent push for a nation building narrative in education hasn't come from nowhere.
No, yeah.
Would you
It,
mind sort of sketching out some of the
I
things
think,
you've
yeah,
observed?
yeah. I think probably people will be people. I'm sure you will be aware of. You would have heard of the Atlas Network, and when I first heard of the Atlas Network, I thought, oh, here we go, another conspiracy theory. But it's actually a real thing. And when you start looking at what's happening in other countries in the world that New Zealand is closely affiliated to, and particularly our current government parties are very, very closely connected to. You actually start joining the dots. And so I'll take you back in time. I'm going to hold this. This is a book written by Roger Childs, who used to be the head of department history at the Correspondence School. He's now retired. This book called New Zealand's History Curriculum, Education or Indoctrination, it asks. Um, this guy's closely affiliated to Hobson's Pledge. They published his, what do you call it, submission on the draft Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum, which was very much focusing on New Zealand history and the value of local narratives and people's stories. This preferred a top-down nation-building narrative. People like Childs and Julian Batchelor in the 2023 election were going around the countryside arguing that the Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum is a form of indoctrination. And
Mm.
they based their argument on the work of two academics in particular, Professor Paul Moon and Professor Elizabeth Rata. So are you both aware of who these two academics are and where they stand in the political spectrum or
Well, I
their
believe
affiliations?
one of them's a dame now.
At the
Yes.
top. Doesn't that mean they sit at the top of the educational spectrum? We are, Richard, but please, for the listeners, give us a
Sure. Okay.
couple of
So
bio.
Elizabeth Rata has a long history of being very critical of Māori political aspirations, very critical of what she calls neo-tribalism or tribalism. You have Professor Paul Moon, on the other hand, who takes a more nuanced stance as a historian, but again, both of them have strong links as founding members of the Free Speech Union.
Mm,
And you know, despite their pleas of political objectivity and neutrality, neither of them are neutral. I am not neutral. No one
mm,
is neutral. I've been very transparent about my upbringing, my cultural positioning in
mm,
relation to Māori, in relation to the union movement, and they equally, I feel, should be transparent about their privilege and their political affiliations to the Free Speech Union, which was founded by the Taxpayers Union,
mm.
which was founded by, you guys tell me, who founded the Taxpayers Union?
One of Jordan's many of Jordan's parallel sock puppets that he
Absolutely.
continues to wield on a
Yeah.
daily basis. But
And
yeah,
the
all of these
yeah,
things are
and the
linked.
Taxpayers Union, along with the New Zealand Initiative, are paid up members of the Global Atlas Network. So they're part of the same social media ecosystem. They're
Mm,
ideologues. They share the same ideologies. They share the same global academic networks. But what I'm also pointing to is when you have Roger Childs writing this book, which was published through Tross Publishers. Tross has had multiple complaints about their racist publications. You don't believe me? Google them. Tross
mm.
Publishers.
Some homework for
It's
the
you
listeners.
know you can't help but think, hang on. So these academics, who are they influencing? Well, they're influencing people like Batchelor. They're influencing people like Roger Childs. And during the 2023 election campaign, people like Dr. Sanjana Hatatua, the Disinformation Project, was mapping the influence of Batchelor, and it was actually quite profound, quite significant. And also, what Sanjana shared with me in discussions was a lot of the chatter on various right-wing platforms, if you will, was about the history curriculum.
Mm,
So this idea of a woke left-wing pro-Māori decolonizing curriculum that is tearing our nation apart. It is divisive. It is apartheid. And then you've got right-wing politicians and people like Batchelor talking about civil war.
Mm.
So there's a lot of disinformation that was being spun around this curriculum at that time. What I found really disappointing was Professor Paul Moon, Free Speech Union, who's also a director of the Israel Institute of New Zealand. That is significant because, again, in terms of the Zionist project, he's always been quite protective of or critical of those who are pro-Palestinian. He developed a course in Holocaust studies with one of his former students, Dr. Melissa Darby. Melissa Darby was also a member of the Free Speech Union. Both Melissa Darby and Elizabeth Rata are appointed to the Ministers' Advisory Group in Education. Darby had her PhD only for a couple of years. She was no academic heavyweight. And as we've presented to the tribunal, the minister appointed Darby and Rata and Michael Johnson from the New Zealand Initiative, and all three were very well known to each other. They'd collaborated on multiple occasions. Despite the advice of the ministry, and the minister appointed these three to the minister's advisory group, they had the minister's ear. They had the ear of the ACT Party. What's also interesting is Darby would be appointed, quote, unlawfully to the position of race relations conciliator as well. That was High Court finding recently. Do you see where I'm going with this? So Paul Moon, working closely with Darby, created the Holocaust Studies course at Auckland University of Technology. And then you have Melissa Darby appearing in national media outlets claiming, based on her research, that the Holocaust is not being taught about in New Zealand schools. There's too much focus on other stuff. I'm sure that my good old mate Pmax would be the first to tell you that actually the Holocaust is taught in New Zealand schools.
Quite extensively.
Yeah, very extensively. But now we've got the Holocaust Centre and their allies pushing quite hard that the Holocaust studies should be mandatory in the curriculum now. And my question is, well, why aren't we learning local Māori histories? Why aren't we learning about genocide in this country, Holocaust in this country? And when I say Holocaust in this country, I'm talking about the Waitangi Tribunal report for Taranaki, which described what happened in Taranaki as, quote, a Holocaust. Yeah, and people will say I'm being provocative. I'm actually quoting what a standing committee of inquiry found as a result of years of research. We learn so much about human rights elsewhere, but we never study human rights issues in our own communities where we live here in Aotearoa.
Yeah, it's funny, right? There's this that's a great kind of background to the distinction in those issues. Really appreciate that, Richard. But it is funny that the instinctive kind of reactionary pull towards localism that you get in some things doesn't extend to things like curriculum, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it'd be
yeah,
great if the local racists thought it was useful to know about New Zealand history.
Well, but even and this is like because there's that great the racist line that they love to pull out when challenged on colonialism, right wingers love to be like, oh well, Maori genocided the Moriori. Well, why not include that? If that's such a big problem, why not include that in the curriculum? But oh no, we can't
yeah,
have that. You know?
yeah. Well, and
Bizarre.
again, it's that classic narrative. And if we were actually teaching about the whole Moriori narrative, we'd actually have to look at the fact, well, as you know it, it's false, that
Mm,
myth. We'd have to address the fact, and I do it in my treaty workshops where I teach, that actually those war parties from Ngāti Tama and Ngāti Mutunga were carried to the Te Rēkohu or the Chathams on British ships, that
mm,
British sailors and others prospered on the backs of Moriori slavery, and from their massacres they exported heads from the Chathams. So who were the headhunters? How were
mm,
Pākehā involved in that? I'm all for teaching about the musket wars too, but again, we'd actually have to examine the role of Pākehā involvement in that. The other
mm,
thing with colonisation locally and looking at it regionally, yeah, we need a more nuanced understanding, not this binary of Māori versus the Crown,
mm,
because some Māori had their own reasons for fighting alongside the Crown against what they considered their traditional enemies, or they had different
yeah.
goals, if you will. There were I'm drawing into my Irish ancestry here. There were Irishmen who fought in British regiments
Mm.
against various iwi. Equally, there were Irish miners who were
Yeah.
Fenians who
Yeah.
actively supported the Kingitanga and Te Kooti, and we know that it's well
Yeah.
documented. And they even offered their services to fight under the Kingitanga flag. So it's nuanced, eh? And we
Yeah.
have to understand the nuances from region to region, what was happening in Waikato is not the same as the East Coast, it's not the same as the Horowhenua, etc., etc. That's why we need
Yeah.
to have that local focus.
This is a bit of speculation on my part, but do you think that that sort of deliberate ignorance of class is part of why there is a institutional resistance to
Oh,
teaching a more nuanced take of New Zealand's history? Because if you start to examine New Zealand's history, you're like, hold on, who are these people making out like bandits every time that something
yeah,
terrible happens in this country? And they've got the descendants who are still doing quite well off the larceny that their forebears committed.
I think that's the truth for us in Aotearoa, New Zealand, as it is in Australia, as it is elsewhere. And again, I try and work with my students to encourage them to actually see themselves, whether they're from India or China or from Ireland or Scotland, their ancestry, that we're all impacted by
Mm,
colonialism and colonization and that process, and that we're here, largely many of us, because of that history, that
mm,
process, and we need to understand that process. I and I again, it's really interesting. You think of Marx, and the right are terrified of critical pedagogy, which is really a big thing that Elizabeth Rata and others play on. That it's Paul Moon did it as well. They said that this is a Marxist history curriculum because it encourages critical thinking. Well, yeah, but history does address questions of power, and it should. And how have inequities today come about? They haven't happened in a historical vacuum,
mm,
and they're nuanced. And it's yeah, it's. I just think New Zealand does deserve better if we're serious about critical thinking. And going back to Marx, yeah, how many New Zealanders realise that in the last chapter of the first volume of Das Kapital, Marx predicted what would happen here to Māori, and that they would become like a landless peasantry. And he was so critical of the New Zealand company.
mm.
By doing that, you're effectively shaking the foundations of the colonial settler elite. And I think that's what they're terrified of.
I mean, the problem is you have to learn history to know those things, right?
Yeah,
Richard? So
Yeah.
yeah,
it becomes like
The
a
yeah.
chicken and the
circular
egg.
defense.
Yeah,
Um,
and again, you can see that again across Australia, you've got the Gina Reinhardts and co, the Atlas network, the Advanced Australia mob, Pauline Hanson's crew. Here we've got Winston Peters, New Zealand First. We've got ACT, and people say, yeah, but they're led by Māori. I'm saying again, so what? There's nothing new here. People will do what they do because they exercise agency then and now. And if it, not, historians don't have a problem with that. So it's that sort of hollowing out. And if we understood the that history of what Marx had predicted for New Zealand, I'm not saying he's 100% right about everything he wrote, and it's a pretty dense read. But we'd have to accept, we'd have to really look at why was the Waikato invaded, and I'll leave that to the likes of Pmax to answer. But I think we know. It's kind of obvious. This is rich, fertile land, and Waikato iwi were prospering through exports overseas, and it
Mm,
defied the racial logic of the time and the dominant class who couldn't get their hands on the land. It's about the acquisition of land. It was then, and it is now. And that's the thing. It's nothing new. What's happening? Stripping Māori of their rights by removing references to the principles is treaty principles, etc., is opening up the land for exploitation by offshore mining interests and the like. That's exactly what Marx predicted back in the day when he wrote Das Kapital. He wrote about it.
yeah.
So I'm not surprised that we have people like Elizabeth Rudd and Paul Moon terrified of him.
yeah, also slightly telling on themselves to say this is Marxism when they just pointed at as a history curriculum, right?
Yeah,
Because it
yeah.
contains nuance and a materialist class
Uh,
analysis.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
yeah,
well, you don't have to think it's that, but
well,
the fact that you do is
yeah.
a
yeah.
You see, what they really objected to was were these I forgot what they called them, like the big understandings, if you will, and it was this idea
Big
that
ideas, I think.
the big idea is that Māori history is kind of encompasses New Zealand history. There was Māori history before that. That's kind of shocking for those who like to think, no, history turned up when the white man arrived because he
Yeah.
brought the written word. Then you've got that there are questions of power, and that is what clearly the New Zealand Initiative, Hobson's Pledge. If you read all the um, what do you call it? Submissions and expressing concern about the Aotearoa New Zealand History's curriculum. That's what they resented, that
I'll
the
I'll I'll be honest,
questions of power.
I'm very glad that you read those submissions so I don't have to.
Yeah, it's my bread and butter. Yeah, yeah, but it's seeing it in the historical context. It's like it's pulling away the rights of Māori so that these people can access. I mean, Shane Jones himself said it, drill, baby, drill.
Mm.
And people shouldn't be surprised that a Māori is saying it. He's an individual. He represents his own whānau, but he does not speak as a for all Māori any more than I speak as a for all Pākehā. So there's that nuance.
Yeah, absolutely. Just looking at this Waitangi Tribunal action, can you explain to us how that's gone and how you found that as a kind of
Yeah, it,
contrast? Maybe is too strong a word, but as as at least like a different point in that struggle.
well, for me being involved in it, it was nice. For me, it was a relief to be able to pull together, to be able to use the research I'd been doing, and to be able to use it in a way to advocate for the rights of, I will say, all of our children,
Mm.
to be able to grow up and live in this land and have a deeper, more critical, more nuanced understanding of contextual factors that shape us. And rather than a curriculum which is top down, here's 101 useless facts according to the preferred academic elite. So, as part of the claim, I was there to support the New Zealand Education Institute, the NZEI, which is the Primary Teachers Union. Alongside us in the claim, we had the Primary Teachers Union. We had Ngāti Hine and Te Kapotai from Te Tai Tokerau to the
Mm.
iwi up there. And yeah, we were concerned about effectively how the New Zealand curriculum was being gutted like a fish of references to the treaty, to references to Mātauranga Māori, Māori knowledge,
Mm.
and to histories which challenged the received wisdom of, I would say, our bourgeois Pākehā elites, if you will, using that sort of language. I'll probably get sent to Guantanamo now.
We'll be there with you.
But it's so the idea, like the curriculum framework of Te Matai Aho, it had been totally gutted.
Mm.
It's been distorted. The Te Marautanga, which is the Māori curriculum, which is meant to be very much an indigenous curriculum, is now pretty much a translation of the Pākehā curriculum. So now you could be in a kura kaupapa or whare kura iwi, whatever, and you might be you will now be required to learn about the Battle of Thermopylae. And I'm sure my
Ah.
brother's grandchildren at the kura iwi up in Otaki are going to be so thrilled to be learning so much about the
Now,
Spartans and Thermopylae.
if you taught it using the Zack Snyder 300 movie, I'm sure there'll be some lads who are keen on it.
Or maybe that's what inspired them. Yeah.
Probably. Oh, one of the things I did note going through your submission that you linked to us,
Yeah.
and it's also directly links to my personal experience, but on the Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum,
Mhm.
where I think 90% of the educators who taught it believed that it had juice.
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah.
I it's going to be the coldest comfort, but I am looking forward to seeing what the ERO report is on teacher approval of the recently released Year 9s and 10 social studies curriculum.
Mm.
Because I was lucky enough to teach the Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum for a few years,
Mm.
and that was probably In terms of mandated government, you have to teach this material, the best material that I'd ever worked with.
Yeah.
And it's a real shame that it seems to be history in itself. Hopefully, something that we can reverse in the coming years.
I, I guess a thing to be wary of is actually Aero itself too, and how it's become very
Mm,
politicized.
mm,
And what I would say to people who watch your podcast is to go back to 2024 and look at criticisms of the Aero evaluation of the Aotearoa New Zealand History's curriculum. So within months of this curriculum being mandated, they're suddenly auditing it. Um, I believe that Minister Stanford is using Aero a bit like a sock puppet. I've had real frustration dealing with both the ministry and Aero with official information requests, as have many others who have been doing research in this field. Um, what Aero did was a very shonky piece of research, which just confirmed what the minister and Hobson's Pledge and others and the ACT Party had been arguing during the 2023 election that, quote, and I think it was Paul Moon who initially coined that phrase, balance, the curriculum needs balance, otherwise it'll be indoctrination. Um, Roger Childs said it as well. So that became the catch call, balance. We need balance in the curriculum. Balance meant really that we need less Māori and local content and more of our stuff, to put it bluntly. So when Aero
mm.
did its report, guess what? What a surprise. Māori and local history content was quite new. So teachers, Aero reported that there's too much focus on Māori history and local history. That's to be expected when it's such a new curriculum and teachers are picking up and trying to find resources and do this stuff. We found the research, only one kaumātua was interviewed. The Aero research team didn't interview any iwi, any hapu, any Māori academic experts.
Wow.
None of the education experts who were involved in reviewing the history curriculum, from what I can see through the Official Information Act material I've had released, none of them were Māori. In fact, none of them were historians or teachers of history. They were
Wow.
both geographers. And guess what? The minister said, and a civics education expert. And guess what? The minister said there's too much Māori local history. We need more geography and we need more civics. Well, we got it now. We've got an overcrowded curriculum. And the problem, again, with civics education is we learn to be good citizens, according to who?
Mm.
Oh yeah. The, I've gone off about the civics education, the civics curriculum on the pod before. Honestly, what a shocking,
Yep.
a shocking piece of work. But especially because between, I think civics and the other one is sociology and the
Hmm.
new subject strands, they've absolutely ripped what was quite a beautiful subject, social studies, just they've ripped it to shreds
Yep.
and they've taken out pretty much all. I can't remember if there's any about this in the civics curriculum because it's about 50 pages long and it's mostly tripe.
Yep.
Not the good kind, but direct, sort of direct action. Students getting involved in their communities, getting involved in making the world a better place, which
Yep.
was a core part of the old social studies curriculum. It's completely gone.
Yep.
It's observe what government does and then philosophy and that'll somehow make you a good citizen. That's philosophy and debate
Yeah.
tactics.
Yeah. But whose philosophy and whose
Yeah.
debate tactic? And again, you could trace that back, I think, to the likes of Jonathan Ayling, and other friends of Rata and Darby, etc., who the New Zealand Initiative. You think of Jonathan Ayling's charter school in Wellington. That's very much what they're into. Yeah,
Yeah.
and again, when they talk about philosophy in relation to Māori, they've had this kind of clip on Māori values, like
Mm.
Māori value kotahitanga. Well, there are actually Māori philosophers out there,
Yeah.
but I suspect they're afraid to actually um,
Engage with that.
engage with them because it might challenge the received
Well,
wisdom of
because
the Western Empire.
there's the Pacific philosophy as well, which I think is
Oh
just
yeah.
Samoan
Yeah,
ideas.
yeah, 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 absolutely. Again, it's a clip on. It's tokenism. There's no
Yeah.
understand. Again, the Pacific is full of philosophers. Every
Mm.
island nation has its philosophers, right? Um, but often their philosophy challenges the colonial project.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't see any Fanon on the list, weirdly enough.
No, no, no.
So in terms of, I mean, I just keep thinking about like the prescriptivism of this. Like, obviously, a good teacher's going to do their best with whatever you start with, right? But there's some kind of limitation on how much you can do when you're being instructed to teach trash, basically, you know? And you have to cover 100 points, all of which
Yeah,
you kind of have disagreements with. And you only have kids for a certain amount of hours, and
yeah,
we all know how hard it is to herd
yeah.
30 kids as it is, right? In an underfunded situation, et cetera, et cetera. So what kind of, I guess, vectors for pushback are there in the education profession if this is
I-
the
I've
direction of
I've
travel?
I've long felt, that I've said this at a summit, at the Te Akapumo summit last year, when we had a large gathering of people from around the country to discuss what's happening in the curriculum. I have felt concerned that I think there've been a number of things that we could or should be doing, and they may not prove popular with a lot of my peers, but I'll say it. Firstly, I've been quite concerned that I've had colleagues from within subject associations and fellow academics who have been prepared to go into, I think they're calling them sector expert groups or whatever they're calling them now, the groups that are the writing groups.
Mm.
The writing groups get ignored anyway. And I've had many of them tell me, oh, we've got the best intentions, we'll do right. My question has been, and I said this to a room full of union people from teacher iwi all around the country were there. Um, I thought we'd stop sending rugby teams to South Africa without Māori or Pacifica players. You know, if, so
Mm.
how was it that here we are, educated people with treaty affirmation statements in our union constitutions and otherwise? How was it that we will walk into a ministry room, we will sign non-disclosure agreements, which effectively gag us? Now, if you're an academic, that means you lost your responsibility as an academic to critique received wisdom.
Mm.
That's a privilege, but it's also a responsibility. There's no way I'm ever going to sign that, but plenty of my colleagues will, and I that concerns me. Why?
Mm.
Well, only they can answer that, but I question the wisdom of doing that. Um, so you go into a room, but there's not one Māori or Pacifica person in the room, and they're writing a curriculum about Māori without Māori, about
Mm.
Pacifica people without Pacifica people, about Chinese New Zealanders without Chinese New Zealanders in the room. It's not open, it's not transparent.
Mm.
I've said, the previous curriculum had its faults, but what was good about it was there was actually transparency, and the people in the room were representative of a broad section of our society. So, for example, the Te Pauhiri Kōrero, the Māori Historians Network, which is nationwide, was represented by Professor Aroha Harris and Associate Professor Nepia Mahuika. We had Damon Salesa in there, representing a lot of Pacific historians. You
Mm.
had Manying Ip, as a Chinese New Zealand historian, representing a constituency. We had Michael Belgrave from the New Zealand History Association. We had the New Zealand History Teachers Association. We had the Social Studies Teachers. We had a broad church. What's happening now is we don't know. Because of these non-disclosure agreements, the ministry refuses to tell the public exactly who is who in the zoo, who is making the final call on the curriculum. What we do know is the influence of the Minister's Advisory Group, as I said before, Michael Johnson, um, Elizabeth Rata, and we know that the minister's had a conversation with Paul Moon, a very long one, a week before he made a public announcement declaring the draft curriculum was a triumph. I don't see that as a coincidence, and that's on the public record in her proactive diary release. So I think to push back, we need to demand more transparency about who is making the final decisions, and we should be holding our professional peers to account. Why are you engaging with a process? Why are you enabling a racist curriculum, a classist curriculum?
Mm,
Why do we not just withdraw? And I think we could go further too. We could, as teachers, we know the difference between an official curriculum and an enacted curriculum. We also know that we have a code of standards and ethical responsibilities and duties of care to the young people we teach. Um, if I know that teaching this curriculum could cause offence or harm, why would I deliver it? Now, for example, Māori history in the draft curriculum sits alongside Stone Age cultures.
mm.
Eh, And Māori are considered a primitive culture because that they didn't have, written literacy. Are you going to go home? Sorry, are you going to go to school Pmax and teach that to the the students in front of you? What would be the risks if you did?
Yeah, not going to be teaching that particular line.
So what are
Um,
the risks if you did? Because this is, I think, a really important thing that we should all be thinking about as
yeah.
teachers, as workers in the sector.
You could cause real harm to the students in front of you. You have a student who's actively engaged in their culture, and they have a teacher, a person of authority standing in front of them saying, your culture is equivalent to the lowest development level,
Yeah.
most primitive thing that we can conceive of. To think about ways to subvert the curriculum, it's already happening. I've given this example on the pod before, but I mean, you'll be familiar, Richard, with the is it year nine where they have to do the Industrial Revolution and the French
No.
Revolution and
Yeah, yeah,
everything
yeah.
all in one. I have a colleague
Yep.
who works in an intermediate. He has the only way he's found out that he can actually teach that content is by teaching an explicit class analysis of how those revolutions came about.
Mm,
So he's taking the prescribed content and
yep.
sort of flipping it on its intended head
Yep.
out of necessity.
Mm. Yeah, you could flip it. We could be strategic, but I guess where I was trying to go before with you was
Oh,
you said
apologies.
it's going to no, you said it would cause harm to the
Mm,
child, and how will the family or the whānau of that child feel when they're told that the curriculum, the textbook says that that they're Neolithic, they're Stone Age, they're
mm,
this and that, because it does create this social Darwinism effectively in the curriculum. That is social Darwinism. It's a hierarchy based on technology. We know that. Um,
mm.
so if it's harmful, how do you think they're going to react? Will they come to school? Will they have you on? Is there
Um,
a risk of that?
it's probably not going to be great for the attendance stats.
Not great for the attendance stats and possibly for your relationship with the whānau. And
Mm,
I've, as Lynn Jarman said at the tribunal hearing, that it could not only put them at risk, but it could actually make whānau really angry and come to school, and it could actually be harmful to her as well.
mm,
So my question is, at what point does this constitute possibly a workplace health and safety issue?
mm, mm.
And at what point could we then take industrial action and refuse
That's
to teach this because it's harmful? And it, it, there's an argument to be had, I feel, that
mm,
we should be exploring. The other thing, too, as you said, the official curriculum is not the enacted curriculum. So, your friend who subverted the exercise, I would encourage people to, if you know it's unsafe, unhealthy, why would you do it?
mm,
Because we have ethical obligations. The the legal possibility I'd love to see people take this seriously is if the final curriculum or even this draft curriculum is considered harmful and could be proven harmful, that's
mm,
grounds for industrial action. We could withdraw
mm.
our labour. We can only withdraw our labour on the basis of we're negotiating salary, right? A wage
Yeah,
round, our contract, or alternatively, if there's a health and
health and
safety
safety
issue.
issue. Yeah.
Is this a health and safety issue? It's a question I'm still asking.
Yeah. I think we'll have to see the final shape of the curriculum, the intended delivery
Yeah,
of it, like what do the materials look like. I can definitely tell you in terms of the stress of looking down the barrel of enacting all of this, I definitely consider that a health and safety issue.
yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah. It's not great.
And my other thing is, as a teacher, how do you feel about people representing you as a subject teacher, going
Mm,
into a room where maybe there's inadequate representation of Māori, Pacifica, or anyone else, given that you're part of a union that has a constitution which upholds the
yeah.
treaty?
Oh, it's enraging.
So,
It's
so, so why are we doing
infuriating.
this? Why engage? Why enable that process?
Yeah. No, I 100% agree.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a obviously like a brutal point to try to get into, but I thought it's kind of worth investigating that because I suppose there's that side that's kind of the shield, right? How to defend yourselves as
Yeah,
a profession when you're being attacked by quite an authoritarian kind of imposed value set that goes so fundamentally against everything that traditionally kind of educators would stand
yeah,
for, right? Like I come from a
Mm,
I don't talk about myself that much on the podcast, but I come from an entirely teaching family. Like almost all my relatives are teachers. It's almost
mm,
embarrassing. But it's just
yeah,
kind of an expectation that you're there to kind of help people learn stuff, right? There's like a deep curiosity to it about like the things you've been saying about nuance and actually being kind of curious about fellow human beings and wanting to know about
mm,
where you're from and this kind of stuff. And the fact that there's this like beyond deep in curiosity, but like antipathy to actually learning things and challenging yourself,
mm,
you would think would go really like to the heart of the profession and go, look, these people are not only like not on your side, but they hate you. Like they want to destroy the
yeah,
philosophy that you
yeah,
stand for, right?
yeah,
mm,
So I think it's worth thinking about that from like a defense perspective, how the profession can look after themselves and continue to
yeah,
just exist as an organization. But then on the other half, the sword of that versus the shield of kind of defending yourselves is how are we going to get that back, right? Like it sounds like there was a lot of good only a few years ago that was
yeah.
just starting to happen because Lord knows when I went to high school, the history curriculum was nothing to write home about. Um, it was pretty bad already. And I mean, I did seventh form history and actually visited some sites and had a great teacher.
Mm.
And we took a bus down from Auckland to the Waikato and actually saw some sites and talked through like the processes of different like iwi negotiations and stuff. So I'm sure our teacher did the best he could,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
With
yeah,
like really rudimentary stuff.
yeah,
Um,
but it
but
sounds
how
like you
hard
got
would it?
a better
Sorry?
history. Sounds like you got a better history education than most New Zealanders.
Oh,
absolutely.
100%. A hundred
Yeah.
percent. But then how hard would it be to get back to what sounded like it was happening even a few years ago from what Pmax has been keeping us in the
I,
loop about?
I don't think it would. I actually don't think it would be hard. I actually
Okay.
think people, again, like the research. I mean, I'll just quote you this. Eero found three-quarters of teachers it surveyed, remember the infamous Eero report, three-quarters of them felt confident in understanding the content, and better yet, 90% of the teachers in Eero's research, which the minister used and overlooked this fact, 90% enjoyed teaching it because they could make learning more meaningful and relevant to the lives of the kids they taught. That's
Wow.
Eero's report, which the minister didn't, you know, put
Look
under
at
the
that
limelight,
part.
did she? She
Yeah.
overlooked that bit. And the other thing that I think's really interesting was that the review office concluded that the students it surveyed are twice as likely to enjoy the history when learning about New Zealand's place in the world. I mean, what they found was that Māori Pacifica students, especially, like 87% of them loved it. Now,
Mm.
these are often some of the most, statistically vulnerable kids,
Disengaged.
disengaged kids, because they could see themselves in the curriculum. And this is a curriculum that put us as New Zealanders in the centre. It was Aotearoa centric. This curriculum is we're kind of on the, you know, the fringe of the empire sort of stuff.
Mm.
It's colonial cringe. So yeah, it's a top-down, very Eurocentric curriculum. Whereas what we had before was not, I wouldn't say it was a Māori-centric curriculum, it was Aotearoa-centric, and it
Yeah.
actually allowed kids from different ethnic groups to wrestle with questions and explore their place in the world.
And I
And
think,
common sense, you start local, you go regional, then
mm,
you go national, and then you go out to the international.
yeah, and I think importantly to build on that, it was Aotearoa eccentric, but it wasn't Aotearoa exclusive. It
No,
was
it wasn't.
still a world history
Yeah,
curriculum.
yeah,
It just more focused on what is our role in the world.
yeah.
What is the role of our ancestors in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could, and I use this example a lot. Thinking about my story, my children's story, is my Irish grandfather. Well, what forced him to come to this land? So I have to see my story as part of an Irish diaspora. And the causes of the Irish diaspora are the causes of the Māori diaspora, the rural urban drift in this country, land loss, culture, language loss, similar themes, recurring themes. And that curriculum allowed us to do that. And I still think it sat well with most teachers because it was the product of a lot of engagement with the sector and a lot of consultation, and not just with the sector, but with the wider community. There was a real demand for it, and I still think that demand is there. Um, but I think teachers need to really draw a line, as
Mm,
we've been saying, and say, well, these are our ethical bottom lines. Um, I I've often done this with students here who are teacher trainees. I've asked them, how many of you have come into the profession to harm children? None of
mm,
them put their hands up.
You'd hope
This
not. Yeah.
curriculum will harm. This curriculum will do harm.
Mm, mm. So I mean, if there's not a huge logistical or financial barrier to just reinstituting or, maybe a
Yeah.
modified version of this curriculum, what do you think the chances are of a future, potentially in 100 days, potentially in 3 years, in 100 days, government prioritizing something like this and
I,
making
I
moves?
don't think it would be hard to go back. And I mean, nobody's saying that you can't
Mm,
tweak things, but I think there'd be a desire. I think the unions have put out a call. We want this frozen. I think the Labour Party have said it. The Greens have said it. Te Pāti Māori have said it. The
mm,
maths and English curriculum. There's debate in that area, but I think most people want to just go back to the curriculum as it was 2023 and slowly, yeah, let's review it, let's critique it, let's refine it, but you don't
mm,
chuck the baby out with the bathwater. This is like what we're experiencing is a 45-degree turn to the
mm,
right, to the far right. It is a far right curriculum. It's like something that was developed in Mississippi.
mm.
yeah.
While it was burning.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's probably an appropriately depressing time to wrap up, Richard. Is there anything you think is useful for people who aren't deep in the weeds with this? We'll obviously share the link that you shared, but if there's anything people are curious about to kind of follow up on these issues, should people be following you? Should they be reading any specific work? If there's anything you want to plug or recommend or shout out to anyone else,
Oh,
this is a good time to do those things.
I'm not really into putting out plugs for myself. But I'd say yeah, you if you go to the Waitangi Tribunal, look at the YWAI 3553 claim. You can see the recordings
Mm,
of the presentations that it was all live streamed, but it's been, still that footage is still there. A lot of the briefs of evidence from the sector, from various primary, secondary teachers, principals associations, iwi, etc. You'll find all that information there. So in terms of the content that I've been speaking about, so
mm,
Y3553, and within there's already the phase one report released, and if you Google
mm,
that, you'll be able to find that easily. The tribunal found that strongly urged the government to stop its bill, to kill the bill in terms of removing references or altering references to the treaty principles. And the next report will be very much around the stuff we've been talking about tonight.
mm,
Te Mātai Aho, Te Marautanga, Aotearoa New Zealand histories, and the impact of this new far right curriculum that's been rammed down our throats.
mm.
So yeah, you can find that information there. That's what I would put a plug out for, if that
Neat.
helps.
Nice,
It
always.
does.
Pmax, is there anything you want to leave us on?
Nothing I particularly want to add or leave us on. It's just been a lovely conversation. It's been good to really dive down into what's been going on with a bit more rigor than usual. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you need the whole hour really to start to dig
Oh
into the
yeah,
ideas behind some of the stuff, right?
yeah,
Yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to do this year is get a bit deeper into some of these things where otherwise we wouldn't have time and we'd skip past this to another current events issue. When you're not
yeah,
just looking at current events, you can hit things a bit harder, you know.
yeah.
Mm.
Well,
Um,
the other thing I'd say, and I'm not promoting them, but you've heard me talk about the work of Elizabeth Rata and Paul Moon. Check them out. Go
Mm.
Google them and look at what they've said on places like The Platform with Sean Plunkett and Michael
Yeah.
Laws. If you don't believe me,
Yeah.
go see and read for yourself.
The strongest argument against Elizabeth Rata is reading her work.
Yeah, yeah.
the
But she is definitely driving this curriculum,
Mm.
and that's why you should see and hear what she's saying.
Yeah, the noted 1 of 200 de-endorsement of of fellow thought leader Elizabeth Rata.
Mm.
Awful, awful
Anyway,
human.
sorry to cut in like that. Yeah.
No, don't apologize. We've really appreciated it, Richard. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For all the listeners, we'll drop all those links in the description. You should be able to find all that stuff. Feel free to message us if there's anything you want to chase up on this issue, if it's lit a fire under you.
Mm.
I know there are people out there listening to this who've contacted us before who go to teachers college or think about becoming teachers. We've got a, reasonably active kind of education passion contingent.
Cool.
And to be honest, I'll probably sick Pmax on you because it's not my area of expertise. But we appreciate everyone's time, and we'll be back next week, if not before, with another episode of 1 of 200 on another campaign season issue. We'll catch you next week. Bye bye.
Bye.